The morning of September 15, 2023, started like any other for what appeared to be a typical wealthy household in the exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood of Boston. The grand Victorian mansion at 47 Marlborough Street stood majestically among its equally impressive neighbors, its pristine facade and meticulously maintained gardens, suggesting the kind of old money that had defined this area for generations. But appearances, as the events of that day would prove, can be devastatingly deceiving. Marcus Wellington III had arrived at the mansion 3 months earlier with all the confidence and entitlement that his family name and substantial bank account typically afforded him. At 38 years old, Marcus was the heir to a technology fortune built by his grandfather and expanded by his father, with a net worth of approximately $45 million. He was accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted, when he wanted it, without question or resistance. Marcus had been searching for the perfect property to serve as his Boston headquarters while he expanded his tech company's East Coast operations. When his real estate agent showed him the Marlborough Street mansion, he had fallen in love immediately. The property was everything he had envisioned: 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, a wine cellar, and a garden that was featured in architectural magazines. The asking price of $12 million was steep, even for Beacon Hill, but Marcus had the resources and the desire. What had made the property even more attractive was the arrangement that came with it. The current owner, according to his real estate agent, was an elderly woman who was moving to assisted living and wanted to ensure the property was well maintained. As part of the sale agreement, the house came with a live-in housekeeper who knew every detail of the property's maintenance and operations. "It's perfect," his agent, Jennifer Morrison, had explained. "The housekeeper has been with the property for decades. She knows all the quirks of the old systems, has relationships with all the best local service providers, and can ensure a seamless transition." The current owner specifically requested that she be retained as part of any sale agreement. Marcus had agreed without much thought. Having experienced household staff was actually a luxury he appreciated, and if this woman was as competent as described, it would save him the hassle of finding and training someone new. The housekeeper in question was Elena Rodriguez, a woman who appeared to be in her early 60s with graying hair typically pulled back in a neat bun and a quiet, efficient demeanor that seemed to embody the ideal of professional domestic service. She spoke with a slight accent that Marcus assumed was either Spanish or Portuguese, and she moved through the house with the kind of familiarity that comes from years of intimate knowledge of every corner, every system, and every need of the property. From the beginning, Elena had been the perfect employee. She maintained the house to museum quality standards, anticipated Marcus's needs before he expressed them, and managed the complex logistics of running a property of that size with apparent ease. She coordinated with gardeners, maintenance workers, and delivery services. She prepared meals that consistently exceeded Marcus's expectations. She managed his calendar, handled his correspondence, and even provided thoughtful touches, like fresh flowers in his office and his preferred coffee blend ready each morning. For the first 2 months, Marcus had been genuinely impressed with Elena's competence and professionalism. She was invisible when he wanted privacy, available when he needed assistance, and seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to keep the household running smoothly. However, Marcus's satisfaction with Elena began to change as he settled more fully into what he considered his property and began to assert what he saw as his rightful authority as the owner and employer. The first signs of tension appeared when Marcus began making changes to the house without consulting Elena. He hired an interior designer to update what he considered the outdated decor in several rooms, replaced antique furniture with modern pieces that better suited his taste, and installed a state-of-the-art home theater system in what had previously been a formal sitting room. Elena's reactions to these changes were subtle but noticeable to someone as self-centered as Marcus. She would pause when she saw contractors working, ask careful questions about the modifications, and occasionally make suggestions that Marcus interpreted as criticism of his decisions. "I understand you're trying to be helpful," Marcus told her one afternoon after she had suggested that the new sound system might be too powerful for the room's acoustics. "But I think I know what works best for my own home." Elena had simply nodded and continued with her work, but Marcus noticed a change in her demeanor. She became more formal, more distant, and what he had previously seen as professional competence now struck him as presumptuous familiarity with property that belonged to him. The situation escalated when Marcus decided to host a dinner party for potential investors in his company. He wanted to showcase both his success and his sophisticated taste, and he saw the mansion as the perfect backdrop for impressing the kind of high-net-worth individuals whose support he needed for his next venture. Marcus hired an expensive catering company and event planner, but when Elena learned about the party, she offered to coordinate the event herself, suggesting that she had extensive experience with entertaining in the house and knew exactly how to present it to its best advantage. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus replied dismissively, "but this is a very important business event. I need professionals who understand the level of sophistication my guests expect." Elena's response was measured but firm. "Of course, Mr. Wellington, I simply wanted to mention that I've coordinated many successful events in this house over the years. I'm familiar with the best ways to utilize the space and the most reliable local vendors. But I understand if you prefer to handle arrangements differently." Something in her tone irritated Marcus. There was a confidence, almost an authority, in the way she spoke about the house that he found inappropriate. She was the housekeeper, not the hostess, and he felt she needed to be reminded of her place. "Elena," he said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he typically used with service providers, "I think there might be some confusion about roles here. You're the housekeeper, I'm the owner. I make the decisions about how my property is used, and you implement those decisions. I don't need your input on my business entertaining." Elena looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Of course, Mr. Wellington, I understand perfectly," but Marcus could see that she didn't appreciate being spoken to that way, and her reaction only reinforced his belief that she had developed an inappropriately familiar attitude toward property that belonged to him. The dinner party itself was a disaster, though not in ways that Marcus initially understood. The catering company he had hired was unfamiliar with the house's kitchen and struggled with the older appliances. The event planner had misjudged the acoustics of the dining room, leading to awkward conversations where guests couldn't hear each other properly. The wine selection chosen without Elena's input paired poorly with both the menu and the tastes of Marcus's sophisticated guests. Throughout the evening, Marcus noticed Elena moving efficiently through the background, quietly, solving problems that the hired professionals couldn't handle. She adjusted lighting that the event planner had set incorrectly, provided backup serving pieces when the caterers realized they hadn't brought enough, and even discreetly corrected temperature issues that were making guests uncomfortable. Despite Elena's behind-the-scenes efforts, the evening failed to achieve Marcus's goals. His potential investors were polite, but clearly unimpressed, and several made comments about the charming but challenging nature of older properties. Marcus was furious. But rather than acknowledging that Elena had tried to help or that his own decisions had contributed to the problems, he focused his anger on what he saw as her presumptuous behavior during the event. "I saw you interfering with the professional staff I hired," he told her the next morning. "When I hire experts to handle an event, I expect my household staff to stay out of the way and let them do their jobs." Elena's response was calm but pointed. "I was simply trying to ensure that your guests were comfortable and that the evening went smoothly. I thought that was part of my responsibility to the house." "Your responsibility," Marcus snapped, "is to do what I tell you to do. When I tell you to do it. Your responsibility is not to second-guess my decisions or to act like you know better than the professionals I hire." "I understand," Elena replied, but there was something in her tone that suggested she understood far more than Marcus realized. Over the following weeks, Marcus became increasingly irritated by what he perceived as Elena's failure to accept her proper place in the household hierarchy. She continued to perform her duties flawlessly, but she also continued to demonstrate a level of knowledge about the house and its operations that Marcus found presumptuous. When a problem developed with the heating system, Elena immediately contacted a specific repair service and had the issue resolved before Marcus even knew there was a problem. When he questioned her about it, she explained that this particular company had been servicing the house's systems for years and knew exactly how to handle the quirks of the older equipment. "In the future," Marcus told her, "I want to be consulted before you make any decisions about repairs or services. This is my house, and I want to know what's happening with my property." Elena nodded, but Marcus could see the flash of something irritation, amusement, in her eyes that made him even more determined to establish clear boundaries. The final straw came when Marcus discovered that Elena had been receiving mail at the house. He found several pieces of correspondence addressed to Elena Rodriguez in the day's mail delivery and confronted her about it immediately. "Why are you having personal mail sent to my address?" he demanded. Elena looked at the letters in his hand, and for the first time since he had known her, she smiled, not the polite, professional smile she typically offered, but something that looked almost like genuine amusement. "Those are just some business documents," she said. "I hope it's not a problem. I've been having mail sent here for quite some time." "It is a problem," Marcus replied. "This is my home, not your personal mailing address. You live here as my employee, not as a resident. I want this stopped immediately." "Of course," Elena said, but that smile lingered in a way that Marcus found infuriating. That evening, Marcus called his real estate agent to complain about the arrangement he had inherited with the property. "Jennifer, I'm having problems with this housekeeper situation," he told her. "I think the previous owner may have given her ideas above her station. She acts like she owns the place, and I'm getting tired of her attitude." "Oh," Jennifer said, and there was something odd in her tone. "What kind of problems are you having?" Marcus detailed his complaints, Elena's presumptuous suggestions, her unauthorized decision-making, her apparent belief that she had some kind of authority over the property's operations. "Marcus," Jennifer said carefully, "I think there might be some confusion about the arrangement. Let me look into this and get back to you." "There's no confusion," Marcus replied. I bought the house, she works for me, and she needs to start acting like it. In fact, I'm thinking about terminating her employment altogether. I can find a housekeeper who understands proper boundaries. Marcus, please don't do anything until I can review the paperwork and clarify the situation. But Marcus had already made up his mind. He was tired of dealing with an employee who didn't seem to understand her place. And he was confident that his $45 million net worth gave him the power to make whatever changes he wanted to his own property. The next morning, Marcus prepared to have what he assumed would be a simple conversation about terminating Elena's employment. He had no idea that he was about to discover that everything he believed about the house, about Elena, and about his own position was completely and catastrophically wrong. As he walked downstairs to find Elena and deliver what he expected to be her dismissal, Marcus was filled with the satisfaction of a wealthy man who was about to reassert his proper authority over his property and his staff. He had no way of knowing that within the next hour, his entire understanding of reality would be shattered, and that the woman he was planning to fire was about to reveal a truth that would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about power, ownership, and his own place in the world. Marcus found Elena in the kitchen, as he had expected, preparing what appeared to be an elaborate breakfast despite the fact that he typically ate nothing more than coffee and toast in the mornings. She was arranging fresh flowers in a vase, flowers that he now realized came from the garden that he had assumed was maintained for his benefit. "Elena," he began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he had been practicing, "we need to have a conversation about your employment here." Elena looked up from the flowers, and again Marcus noticed that slight smile that had been irritating him for weeks. "Of course, Mr. Wellington. What would you like to discuss?" "I've decided that this arrangement isn't working out," Marcus said, feeling confident in his position as the homeowner and employer. "I think it would be best if you found other employment. I'm prepared to give you 2 weeks' notice and a generous severance package, but I want you to start looking for another position immediately." Elena set down the flowers and turned to face him fully. For a moment she said nothing, just studied his face with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. Then, to his complete surprise, she began to laugh. It wasn't the polite, deferential chuckle he might have expected from a dismissed employee trying to maintain dignity. It was genuine, hearty laughter that seemed to come from deep amusement at something Marcus didn't understand. "I'm sorry," she said, still smiling, "but I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here." "There's no misunderstanding," Marcus replied, irritated by her reaction. "I'm terminating your employment. I want you out of my house." "Your house," Elena repeated, and now her smile became something that made Marcus distinctly uncomfortable. "Mr. Wellington, I think you need to sit down." "I don't need to sit down in my own kitchen," Marcus snapped. "I need you to accept that you're being fired and start making arrangements to leave my property." Elena walked to a drawer that Marcus had never seen her open before and pulled out a folder of documents. She set them on the kitchen island and gestured for Marcus to look at them. "Mr. Wellington," she said, her voice now carrying an authority that Marcus had never heard before, "my name is Elena Rodriguez Whitmore, and this is not your house." Marcus looked at the documents she had placed in front of him, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. The top document was a property deed, dated 15 years earlier, showing ownership of 47 Marlborough Street transferred to Elena Rodriguez Whitmore for the sum of $8 million. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice sounding strange even to himself. "I bought this house. I have a deed. I paid $12 million. "You have a lease agreement," Elena corrected gently. "A very expensive, very comprehensive lease agreement that included household services and maintenance. But you never bought this house, Mr. Wellington. You've been renting it from me." Double quotes. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. "That's impossible. My real estate agent showed me the purchase documents. I signed a deed. I transferred the money." Elena pulled out another document, a lease agreement that Marcus recognized as something he had signed, but which he had been told was a standard property management agreement for the household services. "Your real estate agent," Elena explained, "works for a property management company that I hired to handle the rental of this house. The documents you signed were for a 3-year lease with an option to purchase at the end of the term. The $12 million you paid was the total lease amount for 3 years, plus deposits and fees." Marcus stared at the documents, his mind reeling. "But why? Why would you pretend to be the housekeeper of your own house?" Elena's expression became more serious. "Because, Mr. Wellington, I wanted to see what kind of person you really were. And unfortunately, you've shown me exactly what I suspected." She pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Marcus to do the same. This time, he complied, too shocked to maintain his previous arrogance. "Let me tell you the real story," Elena began. "My late husband, James Whitmore, was a very successful investment banker. We bought this house 15 years ago when we moved to Boston for his work. James died 5 years ago, and I inherited not just this property, but a substantial portfolio of investments in real estate." Marcus listened in stunned silence as Elena continued. "After James died, I found myself alone in this large house, with more money than I could ever spend and no children to share it with. I decided to travel, to see the world, to experience life in ways that James and I had always planned to do, together but never had time for. But I didn't want to sell the house. It holds too many memories. And I didn't want to leave it empty and vulnerable. So I decided to rent it out, but only to people who would treat it with respect and care. Elena stood and walked to a window overlooking the garden. I've rented this house to 3 different tenants over the past 5 years. Each time, I've taken the role of the housekeeper to observe how they treat the property and how they treat the people who work for them. The first tenant was a lovely family from California. The husband was a professor, the wife was a doctor, and they had 2 young children. They treated me with respect, valued my knowledge of the house, and became like family to me. When their rental period ended and they moved back to California, I was genuinely sad to see them go. The second tenant was a retired couple from New York. They were kind, appreciative, and made me feel like a valued member of their household. We still exchanged Christmas cards. Elena turned back to face Marcus, and her expression was no longer amused. And then there was you, Mr. Wellington. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as Elena continued. From the very beginning, you've treated me not as a person, but as a piece of property that came with the house. You've been condescending, dismissive, and increasingly hostile. You've made it clear that you see me as beneath you, as someone whose knowledge and experience have no value because of my position as the help. But Elena, Marcus stammered, I didn't know. If I had known you were the owner? Exactly. Elena interrupted. If you had known I was the owner, you would have treated me differently. But the fact that you didn't know reveals everything about your character. You treated me poorly because you thought you could get away with it, because you thought I was powerless. Marcus felt his face burning with shame and embarrassment. I was just trying to establish appropriate boundaries. I thought you were being presumptuous. Presumptuous? Elena's voice rose slightly. I was trying to help you succeed in maintaining a property that I've cared for and loved for 15 years. I was trying to share knowledge that could have made your life easier and your entertaining more successful. But you interpreted my expertise as insubordination because it came from someone you considered your social inferior. The full weight of his situation began to dawn on Marcus. What happens now? Elena returned to the documents on the kitchen island. Now, Mr. Wellington, you have a choice. Your lease agreement includes a clause that allows for early termination if either party is unsatisfied with the arrangement. I am invoking that clause. You have 30 days to find alternative housing and vacate the property. Your deposit will be returned, minus costs for any damages or modifications you've made without permission. The remainder of your lease payments will be refunded proportionally. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. Elena, please. I can change. I can be better. I didn't understand the situation. The situation, Elena replied firmly, was that you were sharing a home with another human being who deserved basic respect and courtesy. The fact that you thought I was an employee rather than the owner shouldn't have changed how you treated me as a person. She pulled out another document. However, I am not entirely without compassion. I understand that finding suitable housing in Beacon Hill on short notice can be challenging. I own several other properties in the Boston area, including a very nice condominium and back bay that I could make available to you at fair market rates. But, she continued, any future rental arrangement would be contingent on your demonstrating that you've learned from this experience and are capable of treating all people with respect, regardless of their position or social status. Marcus looked around the kitchen he had thought was his, in the house he had believed he owned, and felt the full magnitude of his arrogance and ignorance crashing down on him. I don't understand, he said weakly. Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning? Why the deception? Elena's expression softened slightly. Because, Mr. Wellington, people reveal their true character when they think there are no consequences for their behavior. If I had introduced myself as the owner, you would have treated me with respect, not because you respected me as a person, but because you respected my wealth and property. I wanted to know who you really were when you thought you had power over someone else. And unfortunately, what I discovered was someone who uses perceived power to diminish and control others. She gathered the documents back into the folder. I've seen this pattern before, Mr. Wellington. People who treat service workers, retail employees, and anyone they perceive as beneath them with contempt and disrespect. It's a reliable indicator of character. But I'm not a bad person, Marcus protested. I donate to charity. I support good causes. You've never what? Elena interrupted. You've never been openly cruel. You've never committed crimes. Mr. Wellington, basic human decency isn't about avoiding the worst behaviors. It's about treating every person you encounter with dignity and respect. Marcus sat in silence, processing the enormity of what had happened. His entire understanding of the past 3 months had been turned upside down. Every interaction, every assumption, every moment of irritation or superiority he had felt was now revealed in a completely different light. The dinner party, he said suddenly. You tried to help, and you dismissed my offer because you assumed that someone in my position couldn't possibly have the knowledge or connections to help you succeed, Elena finished. And as a result, your event failed in ways that could have been easily prevented. The heating system, the mail, all of it, All of it was me taking care of my own property and managing my own affairs, while you assumed I was an employee overstepping boundaries. Elena stood and walked toward the door. I'll be in my study, yes, Mr. Wellington. I have a study in this house preparing the formal notice of lease termination. You'll receive it this afternoon, along with information about the moving process and the refund of your payments. She paused at the doorway. I want you to know that this experience has been educational for me as well. It's reminded me why I choose to live simply and why I value character over wealth. It's also reminded me that true respect can't be bought or demanded. It can only be earned through how we treat others. As Elena left the kitchen, Marcus remained sitting at the island, surrounded by the ruins of his assumptions and his pride. The woman he had tried to fire was not only the owner of the house he had thought was his, but was also wealthier, more sophisticated, and more powerful than he had ever imagined. But more than that, she had revealed to him a truth about himself that was far more devastating than any financial loss. That when he thought he had power over someone else, he had used it to diminish rather than uplift, to control rather than collaborate, and to assert superiority rather than build connection. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington III was forced to confront the possibility that his wealth and status meant nothing if he lacked the basic human decency to treat others with respect. And that realization was more shocking than any revelation about property ownership could ever be. The 30 days that followed, Elena's revelation were the most humbling and transformative of Marcus Wellington III's life. What began as a desperate attempt to salvage his living situation evolved into a profound examination of his character, his values, and the kind of person he wanted to be. The first week was consumed by practical matters and emotional turmoil. Marcus had to contact his business associates, his family, and his social circle to explain that he would be moving, though he couldn't bring himself to reveal the full truth about why. He told people that his lease arrangement was ending and that he was looking for a new property, which was technically accurate but avoided the embarrassing details of his situation. Finding alternative housing in Boston's competitive real estate market on short notice proved to be as challenging as Elena had predicted. Properties comparable to what he had been living in were either unavailable or required lease terms that he wasn't prepared to commit to until he had time to process what had happened to him. After viewing several unsuitable options, Marcus swallowed his pride and contacted Elena about the Back Bay condominium she had mentioned. The property, when he saw it, was beautiful, a modern 2-bedroom unit in a luxury building with views of the Charles River. It was smaller than the Marlborough Street mansion, but it was elegant, well-appointed, and available immediately. The rent is $4,000 per month, Elena told him during their brief meeting to discuss the terms. That's below market rate for this property and location. I'm offering it to you at that price because I believe in second chances, but also because I want to see if you're capable of learning from this experience. Marcus accepted the terms gratefully, but Elena wasn't finished. There are conditions, she continued. First, you'll be responsible for all utilities and maintenance. There will be no household staff included. You'll need to learn to take care of yourself and your living space. Second, I want you to spend at least 10 hours per week volunteering with an organization that serves people who are economically disadvantaged. I don't care which organization you choose, but I want you to experience what it's like to serve others rather than being served. Third, I want you to write me a monthly report about what you're learning from these experiences. Not about your business or your social life, but about how this situation is changing your perspective on relationships, respect, and responsibility. Marcus agreed to all of Elena's conditions, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was committing to. He was still processing the shock of discovering that his entire understanding of his living situation had been wrong, and he was focused primarily on avoiding further embarrassment and getting his life back to some semblance of normalcy. The move itself was a revelation. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus had to pack his own belongings, coordinate with movers, and handle the logistics of relocating without a staff to manage the details. He discovered that he had accumulated far more possessions than he had realized, and that many of them were things he had bought impulsively rather than items he actually needed or valued. Setting up the new condominium was equally educational. Marcus had to learn how to operate appliances he had never used, figure out how to maintain a household without daily cleaning service, and manage his own schedule without someone else handling his calendar and correspondence. The volunteer work requirement initially felt like an additional burden, but Marcus chose to work with a local food bank. Thinking it would be the least complicated option, he assumed he would be doing simple tasks like sorting donations or helping with administrative work. Instead, he found himself working directly with people who were experiencing homelessness, unemployment, and food insecurity. For the first time in his life, Marcus had extended conversations with people whose daily reality was completely different from anything he had ever experienced. I met this woman named Sarah, Marcus wrote in his first monthly report to Elena. She's a single mother, with 2 kids, working 2 part-time jobs but still can't afford rent in Boston. She comes to the food bank twice a week, and she's always apologetic, like she's ashamed of needing help. But she's one of the hardest working people I've ever met. and she knows more about managing limited resources than most business executives. I know. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to understand that Elena's conditions weren't punishments, they were opportunities for him to develop perspectives and skills that his privileged background had never required him to learn. Living alone forced him to appreciate the work that Elena had been doing to maintain the Marlborough Street mansion. He gained a new understanding of the complexity and skill required to manage a household efficiently, and he began to realize how much expertise Elena had been offering that he had dismissed as presumption. The volunteer work introduced him to people whose intelligence, creativity, and resilience challenged every assumption he had made about the relationship between wealth and worth. He met a former software engineer who had lost his job and his home due to a medical bankruptcy, a veteran who was struggling with PTSD and housing instability, and a college graduate who was working 3 jobs, but still couldn't afford to live independently in Boston's expensive housing market. "I'm starting to understand," Marcus wrote in his 3rd monthly report, "that I've been living in a bubble where I assumed that wealth was a measure of character and that poverty was a result of personal failings. But the people I'm meeting at the food bank are teaching me that circumstances beyond our control can change anyone's situation, and that dignity and worth aren't determined by bank account balances." The most significant change in Marcus's perspective came when he began to recognize patterns in his own behavior that extended far beyond his relationship with Elena. He started noticing how he interacted with restaurant servers, retail workers, customer service representatives, and anyone else he encountered in service positions. "I realized," he wrote in his 4th monthly report, "that I've been treating people differently based on what I assumed about their social status and economic position. I've been impatient with people who were trying to help me, dismissive of suggestions from people I thought were beneath me, and generally acting like my wealth gave me the right to be demanding and condescending." This recognition led Marcus to make conscious changes in how he interacted with others. He began expressing genuine appreciation for good service, showing patience when things didn't go perfectly, and treating every person he encountered as someone deserving of basic respect and courtesy. The changes in his behavior didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues commented that he seemed more collaborative and less demanding in business meetings. Service providers began going out of their way to help him because he had become pleasant to work with. Even his family noticed that he seemed more grounded and less arrogant during their interactions. But the most significant change was in how Marcus felt about himself. For the first time in his adult life, he was developing relationships based on mutual respect, rather than his ability to pay for services or his social status. The people he worked with at the food bank valued his contributions because of his effort and attitude, not because of his wealth. "I think I'm beginning to understand what Elena was trying to teach me," Marcus wrote in his 6th monthly report. "Respect isn't something you can demand or buy. It's something you earn through how you treat others, especially people who can't do anything for you in return." As his 1-year lease on the Back Bay condominium approached its end, Marcus found himself facing a decision about his future housing. He had the financial resources to purchase a property comparable to the Marlborough Street mansion, but he discovered that he no longer wanted the same things he had wanted a year earlier. The large house had been a symbol of his success and status, but it had also isolated him from genuine human connection. The smaller condominium had forced him to live more simply, but it had also created opportunities for him to develop real relationships with neighbors, local business owners, and the community around him. Marcus decided to approach Elena about the possibility of extending his lease on the condominium, but he also wanted to have a conversation about what he had learned from their unusual arrangement. "Elena," he said, when they met at a coffee shop near her house, "I want to thank you for what you did. At the time, it felt like the most humiliating experience of my life, but now I understand that it was actually the most valuable." Elena smiled, the same genuine smile that had confused and irritated him a year earlier, but which he now recognized as the expression of someone who had seen through his pretenses from the beginning. "I'm glad to hear that, Marcus. Your monthly reports have been encouraging. It sounds like you've been doing some important work on yourself." "I have," Marcus replied, "and I've realized that the person I was when I moved into your house was someone I'm not proud of. I was arrogant, entitled, and dismissive of people I should have been learning from. What I don't understand," he continued, "is why you gave me a chance to change instead of just kicking me out immediately." Elena considered his question carefully. "Because, Marcus, I've learned that people are capable of growth when they're given the right opportunities and incentives. You weren't a bad person. You were a person who had never been challenged to examine your assumptions about yourself and others. I've seen this transformation before with other people who have had their privilege and assumptions challenged. Some people become defensive and angry, but some people, like you, become curious about what they can learn from the experience." Marcus felt a warmth of appreciation that was different from anything he had experienced before. Elena's respect for him wasn't based on his wealth or status, it was based on his willingness to grow and change. "I want to ask you something," Marcus said. "Would you consider letting me rent the Marlborough Street house again? Not because I want to go back to the way things were, but because I think I could appreciate it properly now." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting request." What makes you think you're ready for that? Because now I understand that. It's not just a house, it's your home, with your memories and your history. And I understand that if you trusted me with it again, I would be a guest in your space, not a master of my domain. And, Marcus continued, I think I could learn even more from living there, knowing what I know now about its real owner and its real history. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face with the same careful attention she had given him during their first encounters. There would be conditions, she said finally. I would expect there to be. You would pay fair market rent $15,000 per month. No household staff would be included, but I would be available as a consultant on the property's maintenance and operations, for which you would pay me a separate consulting fee. You would continue your volunteer work and your monthly reports. And you would host at least one event per year to benefit the food bank or another organization serving economically disadvantaged people. And Elena added with a slight smile, you would have to pass one final test. What kind of test? You would have to spend 1 month working as a housekeeper for another family, so you can understand from personal experience what that job requires and how it feels to be in that position. Marcus didn't hesitate. I accept all of those conditions. 6 months later, Marcus moved back into the Marlborough Street mansion, but as a completely different person than the one who had left it. He had spent a month working as a housekeeper for a family in Cambridge, an experience that had given him profound appreciation for the skill, dedication, and physical demands of household management. The house felt different to him now, not like a symbol of his success, but like a privilege he had earned through personal growth. He maintained it carefully, treated it with respect, and used it as a space for building community rather than displaying wealth. His annual benefit event for the food bank became one of the most successful fundraising events in the organization's history, not because of the wealthy guests he invited, but because of the authentic relationships he had built with people from all economic backgrounds. I learned something important from our arrangement, Marcus told Elena during one of their monthly check-ins. I learned that true wealth isn't about how much money you have or how much property you own. It's about how many people you can positively impact and how much you can contribute to making the world better for others. Elena nodded approvingly. And I learned something too, Marcus. I learned that people really can change when they're given the right combination of challenge, support, and opportunity. You've become the kind of person I'm proud to have as a tenant and as a friend. The arrangement that had begun with Marcus trying to fire Elena had evolved into a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine friendship. Marcus had discovered that the most valuable thing he could own wasn't a mansion or a business empire. It was the respect of people who knew his true character. And Elena had discovered that her unconventional method of evaluating tenants had not only protected her property, but had also created an opportunity to help someone become a better version of themselves. Their story became a reminder that assumptions about power, wealth, and status can be dangerously misleading, and that true success is measured not by what we can acquire, but by how we treat others and what we contribute to the world around us. Legal disclaimer. This story is completely fictional and was created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.